On September 2nd, 1939, the world was holding its breath. The day before, Germany had invaded Poland. Already more than 200,000 German troops crossed the border. Dive bombers screamed over towns. People fled on wagons on foot. And in Warsaw, air raid sirens echoed through the streets. In London and Paris, leaders debated their final warning. Hitler had one chance to pull back, and he did not. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war. That's how the plunge into the Second World War began. In less than a year, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, they all fell. By June 1940, France had been defeated in just 6 weeks. Britain stood alone, fighting for survival in the Battle of Britain. In the skies over southern England, the Royal Air Force held off wave after wave of German bombers. Italy, under Mussolini, had jumped in on Germany's side in June of 1940, but their armies collapsed in Greece and North Africa. And by the 1943 timeline, Mussolini was overthrown. He ended up executed by partisans in April of 1945. Germany's biggest gamble came in June of 1941 when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. It was the largest land invasion in history. The Soviets took staggering losses, 27 million people by the war's end, but they held. At Stalingrad in 1942 and 1943, the German army was surrounded and destroyed. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States was pulled into the war after Pearl Harbor in December 1941. America's factories went into overdrive. Tanks, planes, food, and supplies. 17 million tons were shipped to allies, including the Soviet Union. By June 6, 1944, American, British, and Canadian troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. Paris was liberated 2 months later. By April 1945, Hitler was trapped in Berlin. On April 30th, he shot himself in his bunker. Germany surrendered May 8th, and in Europe, the war was over. But in Asia, it wasn't. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, August 6th and 9th, 1945. More than 200,000 people died in those two strikes. Japan surrendered, and on September 2nd, to board the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, the papers were signed. In just 23 minutes, the deadliest war in history was officially done. 70 to 85 million lives lost. Cities flattened. Nations broken. Families torn apart. And then came the rebuilding. Germany was divided into East and West. Berlin itself would be split by a wall. Britain, though victorious, was exhausted, and its empire unraveled. India gained independence in 1947, and many others followed. France, they rebuilt under Charles de Gaulle, determined never to be humiliated again. Italy became a republic, shaking off fascism. The world order was rewritten. The United Nations was founded October 1945, and the U.S. dollar became the backbone of global finance. In 1949, NATO was created, and in 1955, the Soviets answered with the Warsaw Pact. The wartime allies, the United States and Soviet Union, were now rivals. That rivalry defined the next half-century. The Cold War, nuclear weapons on both sides, proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, the CIA and KGB working behind the scenes. Oil and money turned into weapons of influence. American presidents were judged on how they handled this new balance of terror. Truman with containment, Kennedy with Cuba, Reagan with confrontation. At home, new social contracts were born. The GI Bill sent veterans to college. Highways spread suburbs all across the United States. The civil rights movement gained strength under the glare of a nation claiming to fight for freedom abroad. And through it all, the military-industrial complex, factories, labs, contractors, they never shut down. Eisenhower warned of it in 1961, but it had already taken root during the war and kept growing. And here's the part that often gets overlooked. The United States and the Soviet Union had once stood together. There are monuments to it. The handshake at Torgau in Germany, statues in Moscow, plaques in Washington and Alaska. For a short window of time, they fought shoulder to shoulder against fascism. Ordinary soldiers remembered it. Ordinary people, they wanted peace. So why did it all break apart? Well, because after the common enemy was gone, what was left were two systems that simply could not coexist: capitalism and communism. Add nuclear weapons, spheres of influence, and oil, and you had a recipe for rivalry. And of course, there were always those who profited from division: industries, power brokers, political players. And here's where it all circles back to us. In recent years, around 2023, we saw echoes of old patterns. Wars in Ukraine and the Middle East deepened global divides. Tensions grew between the U.S. and China. Political polarization sharpened in many countries, with debates over history and activism fueling disagreements. NGOs and international groups took on larger roles in relief and advocacy, but their influence also raised questions about politics and power. And as all this unfolded, defense spending and arms sales surged worldwide, reminding us how conflict continues to feed the military-industrial machine. The lesson is the same as it was in 1939 and again in 1945. Ordinary people everywhere, whether it be in America, Russia, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, anywhere else, they want peace. They want stability. They want a future for their families. It's the bad actors, then as now, who feed on chaos. September 2nd, 1939, the plunge into catastrophe. September 2nd, 1945, the step back from the brink. And today, the reminder that unity is fragile. Peace, it is precious. And history does not repeat. It rhymes, unless we learn. These are Interesting Things with JC.